Hey everybody, this is Andy, aka Love Retro BTW, across Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch. I do a podcast every Saturday called Cafe BTW, a morning gaming podcast, a retrospective look at the wonderful world of retro gaming, from interviews to guests. Join us every Saturday, like a Saturday morning cartoon, starting at 8 a.m., 11 a.m. Eastern. Also, if you're on Twitter, please join the brand new retro gaming community, a place to share, connect, and show your love for the retro gaming community. All the links are down below. And remember, enjoy the Gamers Week podcast.
This time on Gamers Week podcast.
As long as we're acknowledging gamers of a certain age, who are probably going to be the primary audience for this, like, let's be honest.
Yep.
Depending on who they get to star in it, of course. But play to the people in their 30s and 40s. Why not?
Tom Holland in Streets of
Oh, no.
All right, are we ready, kids?
Hang on,
Yes, Dad.
let me type this.
Let me clear my throat.
All right, are we going to start this for real?
Yes.
Cool. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gamers Week podcast. Like the name says, we analyze the best, worst, and weirdest headlines of the past week in the video game industry. Today is episode 18, and today is Wednesday, April 20, 2022. And I have with myself two fantastic hosts. First, we'll start off with Donnie, a man who once threw an entire iced coffee at my car 15 years before we met, which, of course, my revenge will be sweet.
And this is how it went. Splat!
And I also have with me a woman who marks her territory with a well-placed hand, Lou Williams.
There's not nearly enough detail in that anecdote.
Exactly.
That means so many things.
And that's the point here. And of course, I am Ryan, aka Retro Game Brews, and today we are going to have a fantastic podcast. So let's start things off with reviews, reactions, and requests. So first up, from Ben Magnet 27, me, late to the party, listening to Gamers Week with my buddy Patrick from Retro Blast Podcast. Woo! And they get to the top 50 video game characters list. Oh boy, do I have words now. Next up is from Arcade Main. After listening to this episode, I just figured they freak Retro Game Brews every recording like Wayne's World voice. I am the puppet master.
Every single time.
It's what gets me hyped for the show. And lastly, from Games with Coffee, finally finished listening to last week's episode. Haha, Blue really wants the Sword of Ultimate Sorcery. I smell a movie idea here, a road trip movie to find a silver sword from a video game contest. Yes, please.
Hell yeah.
Yep, somebody greenlight that. I'll write it over the weekend and we'll be good.
Over the weekend?
Just need a couple of energy drinks and no problem.
There's not a whole lot of dialogue in that, right?
Right. Just rely on CGI heavily.
There you go.
We'll fix it all in post.
And now, it's time for the very important poll.
Good enough.
Donnie's a carnival barker.
Every Monday on Twitter, we post our VIP, Very important poll. If you'd like to participate, follow us on Twitter at GamersWeekPC. So the question was, when choosing a physical video game for your collection, what's most important to you? Coming in at the bottom of the list was the condition of the cart at 5.6%. I know, right? I've got several carts in my collection that, like SNES carts, that are openly damaged. Like you can see the inside guts of the cart. They still play very well. I mean, I'm not going to get top dollar for them if I ever were to sell them, but they're there nonetheless.
You're like that guy who you bump into and he's like, "Oh, just rub it out with a chamois. It's good." Just rub it out with a chamois.
Coming in second place with 18.5%, it's a game I don't already own. Valid point. And the top decision that we received at 69.9%, Giggity.
You owe me a Coke.
Takes poke. I enjoy the game, and that's a great reason to add a game to your collection. So let's look at some of the comments from the poll. At AVGN82, is that the Angry Video Game Nerd 82?
We're famous.
No, I think his name was Carl.
From Carl, the most important thing is that it has to be a game that I want to play. I'm not into owning a game just to have a bigger collection. At Harley Sheen, I like that. Kind of multi-factor, whether I own it or not, whether it's something I'd enjoy or not, and the price. I generally won't pay even average resale value. If it's not a good deal, I pass. That's kind of where I'm at with my pickups on Facebook Marketplace, on Craigslist, on OfferUp. It has to be a good deal in order for me to go and pick it up. I went and did a trade over the weekend for Dragon Warrior 4. It has the map, it has the manual, it has this other like monster guide, and the cart, which is in great shape. This comic book shop wanted $200 for it. My Sega Dreamcast that I was trying to sell with 3 games, 2 controllers, and a VMU, it wasn't really selling for the price that I wanted it to. So I took it in there. They were willing to trade. They gave me $130 for it, and I paid $70 cash, and I got Dragon Warrior 4 in my collection.
Nice.
That is, by the way, my favorite NES RPG. So
I really want to play it. I want to go back and play Dragon Warrior, the original one, because I remember that one, but I've never played subsequently 2, 3, or 4. At Fee-Fi Fo Fum, I've gone all FPGA, but I always shopped for condition. I mean, fun is great, but what about those awful, hilarious, interesting titles that are worth having? Like Sneak King?
Hey, that's a great game.
I'm saying it's not awful. It's hilarious and it's interesting. So there you go. I saved myself. At SCP Words, I've gotten all the games I enjoy. Now I go for box art, condition of cart. And that's something we've talked about before. Buying like a low grade item for your collection, something that might be damaged, something that might have writing on the label or whatnot, but then spotting another one that's in better condition and kind of trading up. Selling off the one that you have, the damaged one in your collection, and getting the other one that's in nicer condition. I am all for that.
Label upgrade.
Label upgrade. And at Joe Caroa says, the smell of the plastic. Yeah.
That new game smell.
My God. I've smelled many a games that just reek of cigarette smoke.
Oh, yeah.
Cat piss, mold. So...
yeah.
Trust me, it's not something I want to have in my house with it smelling like that. I've used many a dryer sheets to get that smell out.
That's a pro tip right there. Dryer sheets will take the smell out of anything.
Yes, it will.
Game smelled like cat piss. I'm not even going to touch it, let alone buy it and try to fix it with dryer sheets.
If it was a little Samson,
I was about to say.
Ooh, no.
You say that now, but yes.
All right, well, we'll wait and see if I come across a copy of Little Samson that is covered in cat piss.
And if not, she'll find a cat for it.
No, kitty, that's a bad kitty. So let's go around and see what the show hosts have chosen for their answer. Blue, let's start with you.
If I am going to buy a physical game for the collection, I want it to be first one that's fun, and probably then it's a game that I don't already own. If I don't like the game, or if it's a duplicate, then I don't necessarily want to keep it. I would be happy selling it off. But Mr. Blue is more of a completionist, and he insists on keeping many games that I think are crap because he likes having lots of copies of lots of different things.
Good point. Ryan, what about you?
So when I originally started collecting, I was going for everything, right? Mm-hmm. Wanted the big, I've got a complete NES collection. After a while, just kind of looking at my collection and going, I'm never going to play this stuff. And I've already got a backlog that's pretty large. So why don't I just keep the games I actually like or the games that I want to play based off of what I've seen or what I've heard people play.
Right.
As far as condition is concerned, I'm less concerned about that. I'm not in the collecting game to speculate necessarily. There is part of me that when a game comes along and it's rare and expensive, there's a part that just likes to flex a little.
We've discussed this before.
Yeah, right. So there's a little part of that, but most of the time I'm looking for games that I want to enjoy.
Right.
I want to play this stuff. So,
and that's not bad. I mean, it's kind of like the pride of ownership type thing, right?
Sure.
Having that expensive game that a lot of people talk about that is very popular, or it could be a horrible game, but it's still very expensive and a lot of people talk about it. And knowing that you have it in your collection, be like, oh, hey, look what I got. And you're like, oh, hey, look at you. You're killing it right there. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
I'm also the multi-factor person. If I don't have the game and the condition of the cart is, if it's terrible, if the price is right, I'll pick it up.
For sure.
I'm not the type of person, or at least I think I'm not, that needs to have every single, I need to complete the NES library or I need to complete the Super Nintendo library. No, I don't have to do that because there are a ton of crap sports games out there for the Super Nintendo, for the Sega Genesis. And I'm sorry, I don't need another copy of NBA 97. Or NBA 98 or whatever. I don't need to have every single game.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't we go ahead and shout out our patrons?
We couldn't do what we do without the help of our gorgeous patrons. Here are the generous folks supporting Gamers Week on Patreon. We have a new patron to announce. Please give a big welcome to Gamatroid.
Yay! Welcome, buddy.
They'll be joining Emo-esque, Bill Tucker, Rybra's #1 fan, Fruitcake's #1 stan, The Wizard of Zardoz, Clayman71, Great Saiyaman 81, BNT Zilla Guy, Geek With That, Crunchy Kong, Sheriff Snacks, Frank Grande, Love Retro BTW, Steven Sand, Terry Kinnair, Ducks in Disguise, Jim and Colleen, Games with Coffee, Davey PGH, The Red Ox PDX family, including Shannon and Luke, Zach Huge Thanks, Random Retro Dude, Princess Kitty Mew Mew, and Mega Retro Man. If you like what you hear today, and we really hope you do, please consider joining us on Patreon. Your support helps cover the cost of producing the show, as well as other cool stuff we'll be doing, like prizes and giveaways. You'll also gain access to our weekly patron-only bonus cast called Gamers Week Uncut, Patrons with Benefits. Visit patreon.com/gamersweek or follow the link in the show notes to learn more.
And if you want to get the jokes from my introduction, join the Patreon. That's all I'm going to say.
You're missing out, man.
All right, so why don't we take a look at this week's headlines? So before we jump into them, our headline segment is proudly sponsored by the Retro Game Club podcast. It's a fantastic, family-friendly retro gaming podcast. In each episode, Rob and Hugh pick 2 games to play and discuss, as well as news, interviews, and other topics. They just released their episode 119, where they talk about Populous and Mappyland. Visit them at retrogameclub.net or follow the link in the show notes. I am awful at Mappyland, by the way.
Yeah, real bad.
I've never played it.
Real bad.
Have you ever played Populous, though?
I have Populous, but it's in the pile.
It's in the backlog?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Isn't Populous for the Super Nintendo?
There is a version of Populous on Super Nintendo, yep.
That's the one that I have, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's like a 3/4 god looking down,
yep.
Playing. Okay, all right.
Yep.
Like, what are you trying to build stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. From notechie.com, PlayStation games might soon feature in-game ads.
Boo.
Right? Joining Microsoft in a move everyone except advertisers hates, Sony is reportedly exploring the option of adding in-game advertisements on upcoming PlayStation games. According to Business Insider, ads could start popping up in games by the end of 2022. These ads would attempt to feel natural inside of games, appearing on things like billboards or possibly directly as products. Think of a can of Pepsi on a desk or some underwear that you're wearing. Like Microsoft, it seems this program is targeted toward free-to-play games. According to BI sources, Sony has been exploring this PlayStation program for the last 18 months. One possible reason Sony is exploring this avenue is that traditionally it has been difficult to target gamers. The whole program is interesting, but definitely not wanted. Advertisers can be pretty particular about where their ads show up. Additionally, many developers probably dislike the idea of ads showing up in their games. Overall, time will tell if these in-game ads ever show up or if public outcry keeps them from seeing the light of day. Fingers crossed we never have to be subjected to Raid Shadow Legends ads in Spider-Man.
Oh, God, Raid Shadow Legends. If you watch YouTube at all, every person is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Yes. Oh, my God. And, you know, it's funny. I watch Simon Whistler sometimes, and he talks about how he's basically put a moratorium on Raid Shadow Legends and jokingly responded to one of their requests to sponsor his content. And he came back with like a ridiculous number. And they were like, yeah, sure, we can do that.
I am willing to be sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends if they're listening.
I'm sure if you started streaming, you'd get sponsored. See?
Can I get sponsored without streaming?
This is just a freaking horrible idea. I mean, come on. If you're talking about something like Spider-Man, an adventure style game, or even like Cyberpunk 2077, okay, maybe in those games, I wouldn't have such a problem with it because you're swinging around town and you've got billboards all over the place. So like, oh, Diet Coke or Audi or what have you. I'm not going to care too much about that. But if I think I saw a picture of, was it Death Stranding maybe, where like the guy's chugging a Monster energy drink?
Yes, that was okay. I full disclosure, I only played 6 hours of Death Stranding and was bored to tears. I don't know if it makes sense later in the world about why everybody has access to as much Monster energy drink as they want. But I mean, it's a world where all these different communities are completely isolated. They can't even talk to a different community that's 2 miles away. So where is everybody getting the Monster? I don't get it.
You brought up Cyberpunk 2077. I'm thinking ads in that one. Like, you know how you can customize your junk in that? I was thinking like you customize labeled junk, you know, from abandeve.com.
Or Charlie's hot dog stand or whatever.
Nathan's all beef hot dogs.
Now selling ad space on my Cyberpunk junk.
Cyberpunk junk. Yeah, if it's not just going to be free to play games because they're going to say, you know what, we can put this in here. We can slide this little advertisement in here and they're not really going to notice, or they're not going to care, or we can just, you know what, screw it. They're just going to have to deal with it. And at that point, if our video games are overrun with ads, I'm done. I'm calling it. I am done with any new video games that have any of that. I'll just stay strictly retro.
100%. Like that was my exact feeling is, okay, you put it in free to play games. Sure, they want to make their money back, whatever. But you're right. I don't trust that it wouldn't become a complete slippery slope to where publishers who are selling full price games won't see how much money there is to be made in advertising in free to play games and say, we want some of that. They've done the same with microtransactions. That's why there's microtransactions in almost everything now. And the game that I always go back to as an example of how I freaking hated this is Final Fantasy 15, where the characters go camping all the time and everything has freaking Coleman's logos over all of their camping equipment.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, based on this description of what is quote unquote natural advertising in a game, that fits the scenario at least. But I was still looking at it going, this doesn't belong in my Final Fantasy game. Right. I don't want to be reminded of real world stuff. But then it got even worse when the game decided to give an entire side quest to freaking Cup-O noodles.
Yeah, cup noodles.
I was just like, what is actually happening? Are you kidding? Not only did it not fit at all the tone of the game, the tone of the story or anything else, it's like, Cup noodles? Really? I have to go chase down ingredients for cup noodles?
I can say I'm glad I've never played that game now.
Rant over, I guess.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Don't necessarily 100% believe this, but everyone complains that the price of games are going up.
Are they really?
I don't recall Final Fantasy 15 being any cheaper.
No, that's fair. That's fair. But games are becoming more and more expensive to develop and create, and the timelines are longer. You got to pay people more money. This might be a way to help recuperate some of that cost so that more studios, if you will stay in the game. Now, that being said, to your point, though, if it takes away from your experience as a player, that's going to tank sales for games like that. So all of a sudden you run into this, like, you know, catch-22 where, yes, you are getting revenue from advertisers to put stuff in your game. But if people are going to be shy away from that level of advertisement in their face all the time, then you won't be generating revenue anyway. So at the crux of this is the expectation is that people will just more than likely ignore this stuff. Like it's like they pointed out, like a billboard, right? Like you're driving down the road, you see all these billboards, 9 times out of 10, you don't pay attention to them. But if you talked about Coleman, right? It's a fantasy game. Why would there be a corporation named Coleman that sells this stuff? So, and to your point, I guess a slippery slope, but I just think the whole thing's a catch-22.
Mm-hmm. Sony, I guess, thanks, we hate it. Please don't do this.
For the love of God, don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay, next up from VGC, the Nintendo Switch's Game Boy emulator seems to have been leaked. Ooh. Official Game Boy and Game Boy Advance emulators for the Switch have seemingly been leaked online. Both emulators appear to have been developed by Nintendo's NERD team, which stands for Nintendo European Research and Development, which is based in France and often handles emulation software for official Nintendo products. The emulators were reportedly dumped from a Switch console, suggesting that work may be underway to include the classic handheld systems as part of Nintendo Switch Online. The leak also appears to list 40 Game Boy Advance games included in the app, including first-party titles such as The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap and Metroid Fusion, as well as third-party games including Castlevania Aria of Sorrow and Mega Man Battle Network 2. This isn't confirmation that these games will be released on Switch Online and could simply be titles that NERD are using to test the emulator's capabilities. It has been speculated for some time that both Game Boy consoles would join Nintendo Switch Online's classic games offering, with multiple sources claiming last year that Game Boy and Game Boy Color games were likely to be added, quote, really soon.
Squee!
Exactly.
I hope this is true, and I hope that it's not going to be one of those ones where you have to pay for the expansion if you want to play Game Boy games.
Like with the Sega?
Yeah, with the Sega and the N64.
This would actually get me playing more Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. I am not a handheld person. I've never been. I'd rather sit there on the actual Super Nintendo or NES and play that as opposed to a handheld game, because they were so small. I couldn't really see anything. Kind of like I felt squished or scrunched. Now, I do have those systems. I have the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Advance SP, a regular Game Boy. I don't really play them all that often, but if these games were available on the Switch, hell yeah.
Now, I will say you can play them on your TV if you do have a Super Game Boy or that Game Boy Advance attachment for the GameCube. But,
yeah, I have a Super Game Boy. That's the only way to go.
Yes,
yeah, me too.
It is legit, especially with the borders that are around it. I imagine they would do the same thing if they're going to release Game Boy games on the Switch, as they would have those really cool borders that came with the Super Game Boy. But man, to your point, Donnie, it's not always easy nowadays, especially with my eyes and stuff. Like
we're old,
right? Playing the original Game Boy is not conducive unless I'm in a very well lit area. So this is exciting. And man, there's so many titles that came out for Game Boy that were unique to the Game Boy and were good.
Definitely.
And definitely the Game Boy Advance as well. I mean, I Mega Man Battle Network, whatever. But Castlevania, Aria of Sorrows, Advance Wars, which they're bringing to the Switch anyway. So, you know. But Minish Cap, Metroid Fusion, think about all the different Contra games. There's the Castlevania games that were for the original Game Boy. There's obviously Super Mario Land 1 and 2.
And 3.
And 3, that's right, with Wario. And so there are so many options that they could bring to this. And I would be super excited. I would be willing to pay a little extra. I got to be honest, to get Game Boy
Depending
stuff.
on what they put on there.
That's true.
Like Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages, and Seasons. I haven't played either of those, and that would be killer if they were ported. Essentially, that's kind of what it is. Like, I've been asking for a port of the Super Mario Land trilogy for a while to Switch and not getting it. But this would almost be like a port.
Port. And also, if it's on the Switch Online, what's cool about that is there is a potential to play 2-player games, the one you would use with the connection cord for the original Game Boy, and play that 2 players. So Tetris is one of those. Now, I don't know if Tetris would be terribly interested in doing that, but there's a bunch of games. Like, I mean, in Pokemon, you can do that where you can trade between people and have fun with that. So it's not just going to be a one-person experience. You could do a lot with this.
Yeah. And it might be a cool little gimmick to be able to play Tetris, the Game Boy Tetris, against somebody else. But I don't think I'd be heavily interested in it as opposed to like the regular Tetris for the NES.
So which game would you want to see on this release if they do Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance? Did I put you on the spot?
Kill me. I'd like to see Battletoads for the original Game Boy.
He woke up and chose violence.
What? It's a good game.
Anything with Battletoads in it is a difficult game at best.
I'm going to go Donkey Kong Land.
Ooh, good choice. That's a good one. Trying to look like the polygon, not the poly, but the pre-rendered graphics from Rare on it.
On the little Game Boy. Yeah, that was a challenge.
Nobody's going to go with Mortal Kombat. Come on.
Ooh, that's like playing on one of those Tiger handhelds.
Yeah. So secretly, my favorite Game Boy game that I played the most of back in the day was Kirby's Pinball. I absolutely love that game. It's
That's a good choice.
So much fun. Music is great. Visuals are great. So I'd love to see Kirby on there.
Make it happen, Nintendo.
Also, honorary mention to Metroid 2.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's like the unspoken Metroid. So absolutely. All right. So next up from The Verge, Sonic Origins launches in June with remasters of 4 classic games. Sorry.
Wow.
I got excited.
All right.
In the lead up to Sonic's 31st birthday, feel old yet? Sega, yes I do. Sega has finally revealed the details behind Sonic Origins, a remastered collection of Sonic the Hedgehog 1, 2, Sonic 3, and Knuckles, and Sonic CD. Don't expect straight ports of these Sega classics, though, in addition to remastered visuals updated for today's console. Sonic Origin includes new achievements, collectibles, animated shorts, and game modes, putting a fresh pair of sneakers, well done, on these old classics. While Sega has given fans up-teen bundles on the first 3 Sega games, Sonic CD hasn't seen a proper re-release since 2011. In Sonic Origins, players will be able to choose between playing in classic mode or anniversary mode. Anniversary mode offers full screen experience along with infinite lives, so you won't have to worry about getting repeatedly crushed to death in Chemical Plant Zone. You know the place. And Sonic Origins launches on Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, and PC on June 23rd.
So Ryan's excited.
I am. And the reason I'm excited is because there's that option between anniversary mode and classic mode. Activision came out with their remasters of a few different games, including Rock and Roll Racing. That had the option as well between anniversary and classic mode. And I played through both versions, and they were both awesome. Anniversary mode took the original and dialed it up a little bit more. There was a lot more funny jokes in it, and some of the action was a lot cooler, but I could still play classic mode on there, which is fantastic. So if I don't like anniversary mode, I can choose not to play that.
Choice is always good, especially with infinite lives.
Yeah, there's the easy mode, right?
Yeah.
There it is. I was waiting for it.
There it is, though. They've included it, and we don't have to use it, and that's the best part. It's an option.
If it's there, you can use it. Absolutely. Well said, Blue.
But me, I'm not sold on this 100%. Like they said, they've already released umpteen bundles of the first 3 Sonic games. And I think I have umpteen bundles of the first 3 Sonic games already. So Sonic CD, I still need to play. I don't have that, but I'm not sure I want to buy this entire thing just for one game.
Right. Donnie, do you own Sonic CD?
I think I do. I'd have to look. I know I own Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 for the Dreamcast. I own Sonic Blast for the Saturn. I think I own Sonic CD, and if I don't, I'll definitely be picking it up next weekend at the Midwest Gaming Classic.
There it is.
Oh, nice.
Nice little slide in there.
A little promotion of where I'm going to be. And if anybody's listening who is going to be at the Midwest Gaming Classic, I'll be wearing my Gamers Week podcast hooded sweatshirt there, passing out stickers and business cards. So be sure to stop me and say hi.
Definitely do.
Punch me in the face if you don't like what I say. So.
Make sure you get that, though. Make sure you get a picture of that, post it on Twitter, and tag us.
Hey, Donnie. Bam. Oh, I didn't like what you said.
Imagine you're going there with somebody who doesn't know about the podcast. You're just like, hold my phone and hit record real quick.
Like, why'd you punch that guy? Well, he said I could. I'm with you, Blue. I've got all of the original games, Sonic 1, 2, and 3, Sonic and Knuckles, and Sonic CD. I think I have Sonic CD. But I don't need another collection of these games that I already have. The only collection I think that's come out recently that I would like to have would be the Ninja Turtles one, the Cowabunga.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, again, since I have all the games, it doesn't make sense for me to go out and buy this collection just for an added feature that I probably won't use.
Well, I'll be enjoying it.
Okay, you let us know if it's worth it. Maybe it is. Maybe the remasters are just that good.
Interestingly enough, I'm not a huge fan of Sonic games, but I don't own all those bundles because I've always had a hard time getting into Sonic stuff. So maybe this is my one opportunity to really see what it's all about.
So hard time, why?
It's to me it's about memorization as to where to go. And if I'm
He's
playing
a Nintendo fanboy, basically.
that too, and so I'm a terrible platform gamer, so that's part of it too. But it just gets a little boring to me after a while, just basically doing kind of the same stuff. Okay. I know.
Controversy.
But that's my opinion, and that doesn't mean that it has to ruin your experience.
Oh, absolutely. Well said.
That's not how Twitter works.
You sure?
I am sure. I've been on there long enough. I am sure.
Next up, from IGN, oh my God, Streets of Rage film from John Wick creator in the works. Classic 90s beat-em-up Streets of Rage looks to be the latest video game to get its own movie. According to Deadline, the upcoming video game adaptation is currently in the works with John Wick creator Derek Kolstad writing the script. Streets of Rage first appeared on the Sega Genesis back in 1991 and has spawned a number of sequels. The side-scrolling beat-em-up tells the story of 2 former police officers taken to the streets to bring down a nefarious crime syndicate. Among gamers of a certain age, Streets of Rage is often considered a classic title, so a big-screen adaptation from a successful action director feels like a very natural choice. Streets of Rage will be DJ2 Entertainment's latest video game adaptation, following on from Sonic the Hedgehog 2's colossal box office performance. The company will also produce an adaptation of the BAFTA Game Award-winning title, It Takes Two. Meanwhile, Derek Kolstad is busy working on Just Watch Me, the upcoming Gerard Butler heist movie. But while John Wick 4 and 5 are currently in the works, they will be moving ahead without Kolstad.
So the gamers of a certain age made me feel like that thing that people post where it says, I'm in this meme or tweet.
Yeah.
And I don't like
feel
it.
seen.
I mean, first it's Sonic's 31st birthday, and then gamers of a certain age.
Right.
News is rough today.
Next thing you know, we'll be taking our fiber pills.
You're not already? I am.
Got my colonoscopy lined up next week. I'm excited to hear that they're doing a Streets of Rage film. It makes sense because of the content. It's a beat 'em up, so it's an action film. John Wick movies are very popular and they do very well. And I think as long as you have a lot of action, along with a good story, of course,
sure,
then I think it could be a success.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really strong points that the John Wick movies have going for them is the world building. Like if you took the action aside, it still has this really unique world building. And so that, of course, is down to Derek Kolstad, who wrote the script. So that's promising for this one. It's not hopefully going to be just completely reliant on action sequences. Maybe it will actually have an okay story to go with it.
I don't know. I'd love to see it as an 80s action flick.
Oh, God, yes.
Just constant action. Stallone, Schwarzenegger, taking down the man. We haven't had one of those in a long time. I think we're due. And Streets of Rage being for gamers of a certain age.
Well, they're still doing the Expendable movies.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
That's true,
Are you sure they haven't picked every aging action star they can find and stuffed them in that movie?
Right. Now, what's going to be key for this to be a success is the soundtrack. Are they going to have that cool synthwave sounding soundtrack that they had for Streets of Rage? And are they going to translate that into the movie?
No, I bet they modernize it.
I think you're right, but I'm holding out hope.
Fingers crossed. I mean, as long as we're acknowledging gamers of a certain age, who are probably going to be the primary audience for this, like, let's be honest.
Yep.
Depending on who they get to star in it, of course. But play to the people in their 30s and 40s. Why not?
Tom Holland in Streets of Rage.
Oh, no. So Tom Holland would be the little kid on the rollerblades in Streets of Rage 3. No, but if Streets of Rage is a success, does that pave the way for Final Fight to come out with a similar movie?
Or, you know what I think needs a mulligan is Street Fighter.
Yes.
I mean, if they could make an actually good one that isn't the most campy piece of you-know-what of all time, absolutely.
I mean, doing a movie based on a fighting game is kind of a stretch, like you saw with the new Mortal Kombat. How do you balance the story and the pacing with the fan service, which the fan service is absolutely crucial in these kind of movies. So it's a tall order, but I still think Street Fighter deserves a do-over.
I agree.
For Final Fight, you could have John Batista play Hagar.
With a sweet little mustache?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's hilarious in most of the stuff he does. So maybe bring a little bit of humor to it. And I'm envisioning him tied up with the dynamite in front of him. Okay. And the knife comes down. That's got to be cool. Yeah, there you go. All right, so why don't we jump into our top 3 new releases for the week?
Okay, first up is Lego Builder's Journey, out on PS5 and PS4. Lego Builder's Journey is an atmospheric, geometric puzzle game that asks us to sometimes follow the instructions and sometimes to break the rules. Take your time to experiment with free-form puzzle solving while immersing yourself in a poetic world of Lego bricks. Throughout the narrative, there will be ups and downs, challenges, and celebrations. Figuring out who we are and what we become is the builder's journey. Star Wars The Force Unleashed is out on the Switch. You are Starkiller, Darth Vader's secret apprentice, who has been trained to hunt down and destroy the Jedi. Take advantage of devastating Force powers and lightsaber combos to do Darth Vader's bidding. Similar to the 2008 release on the Nintendo Wii, use the Nintendo Joy-Con motion controls to truly feel the destructive power of the Force, or challenge a friend to a 1v1 in the local multiplayer duel mode. And finally, Teardown is out on the PC. Prepare the perfect heist in this simulated and fully destructible voxel world. Tear down walls with vehicles or explosives to create shortcuts, stack objects to reach higher, use the environment to your advantage in the most creative way you can think of. So, anything here interests you guys?
Star Wars until they said Joy-Con motion.
Yeah. Probably you can't play with regular controls either.
And I mean, it's cool that there's an option to 1v1 me, bro.
Right.
But that's in local multiplayer.
Yeah, that's annoying too.
Yep.
Right.
I'd rather see the worldwide leaderboards for lightsaber duels. That would be way more fun.
Up the top, Star Wars kid.
And here at the Midwest Gaming Classic, we have the #1 guy on the leaderboard for Star Wars The Force Unleashed. It's like, hey, all right, yeah, give it up for me, yeah.
Everybody's got to have a win.
Yeah, right? That's
Everybody gets their 15 minutes.
That's right.
Everybody gets one. I like Lego Builder's Journey. I'm a fan of puzzle games, even though sometimes they piss me off. This one
just a little,
just a tad. It looks very aesthetically pleasing. Also, Teardown seems interesting, although planning stuff.
We just want to go in guns blazing. We don't want to plan anything.
Exactly. I'm not big into games that like you have to build stuff or plan them. Like Super Mario Maker. I love playing other people's levels. I just hate planning my own levels out.
Right.
So and kind of like the original Rainbow Six game that came out on the PC way back in the day, and I'm not talking like the other day, but back in the day on the PC or the PlayStation 1, it's like you had to go in and plan your routes. You had to plan your takedown for the enemy, the enemy group that you were about ready to go in and infiltrate. And I was like, I wanted to get to the game. I wanted to go in there and shoot people. I don't want to spend an hour planning stuff out. So these types of games don't really sit well with me. But if it's not that bad, then I'll take a look at it.
Right.
What about you, Blue?
I think you personified my thoughts exactly.
If I had to pick one of these three, I guess I would pick Lego Builder's Journey, even though I don't normally go for Lego games. And this one sounds weird from this description. It sounds like they're trying to elevate Lego into something like philosophical or whatever. Figuring out who we are and what we become is the builder's journey. It just seems like a weird combination for Legos. But I also like puzzle games, and so maybe, but it just seems weird.
You have to build up to find Nietzsche.
Yeah. We're trying to build our way to Nirvana, I guess.
I mean, I'm looking at some of the videos on Steam for Builder's Journey, and I mean, a puzzle game, it certainly is.
Are you like manipulating blocks in this puzzle? Like, what are you doing?
Yes. Yeah. So you're like your little guy. I don't know what you call him. Your little character needs to get from point A to point B. So you need to build something in order to get him across a chasm or a gap or something like that.
Got it.
And it's poetic, apparently.
I'm not a big poetry man fan. You know what I mean?
Hey, you like haikus?
I do like haikus. I love haikus. I could do haikus all day.
Was that a haiku? I'm trying to 5-7. All right. So before we bring in Andrew Borman from the Strong National Museum of Play, let's take a quick break to talk about our sponsor. This segment of Gamers Week is proudly sponsored by the Elitist Podcast. It's a show where three friends and occasional guests play games about video games, including trivia, game show games, and more. Here is this week's trivia question. If Atari game developers hadn't run out of fuel, hint, you would have heard a digitized version of Mr. Sandman in one of this game's 50 levels. Tune into the Elitist Podcast this Wednesday to hear the answer. You can find the Elitist on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll have links in the show notes. I'm going to tell you that I know the answer, and it's not anything that you think it is, because I had a hard time finding this one. Tim gave me a bunch of hints, and I finally got it. But at first, I was definitely on the wrong path, if you will.
Okay. It's not Night Racer or Night Drivers, is it?
It's not. It's not.
Hey, Donnie, did you see this? There's a listing on Facebook Marketplace. Someone in your area is offering a CIB copy of Little Samson for free.
What? I'll be right back.
Well, I guess he'll be back.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us with Andrew Borman, who is the digital games curator at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, where he works to preserve the history of electronic games. Previously, Andrew created a website called P2P Online, where he uncovered lost video game history, specifically focused on games that never made it to market. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today.
Perfect. So if you don't mind, why don't you head and introduce yourself here to our audience?
Sure. So as you said, I'm Andrew. I'm the digital games curator at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. I guess I'll talk a bit about my background before we get into the museum, because I think it's a really interesting one. As you mentioned, I started this website, P2P Online. I had this lofty idea of doing a fanzine, a digital distributed thing, but I had no actual skills to do that. Keeping in mind, too, this is before YouTube was actually like the YouTube we know today.
Right.
But, I grew up reading video game magazines, looking at, things like GamePro and EGM and all of those. And even at a young age, I kind of realized that, games don't just magically show up on the shelves after a period of time. There's a process that goes into it. So the big example of that I use is Resident Evil 2, which went through radical changes. One main character was swapped for another one. But at the time, it was really hard to follow because, I got a magazine once every few months. Magazines weren't always the most updated thing. So when the game finally came out, it was quite different. And I kept waiting for these things that I'd seen for months in magazines. That's 1997 or thereabouts, which really hard to do anything about it back then, being a kid.
Right.
But that planted the seed. And then as I got into high school, I realized that there's this whole world out there of collectors, of game development artifacts, that sort of thing. And I specifically latched onto the Xbox, the original Xbox, because nobody else was, quite frankly. And I liked the system. It had a cool modding scene. That was awesome. But the Xbox had a few interesting things. One, it was made in the US, so, games were more available. But also because other people weren't interested in it, I was able to carve out this sort of niche because there's this realization that games are coming on hard drives, not cartridges. Once those hard drives get deleted, that data is gone, essentially. So that's really where I started. But, I went to college. There was no such thing as a video game preservation job. There barely is today.
Right.
Especially something that can actually pay the bills. So I went to school, got my undergrad in information science. Really, social media was emerging, doing research, that sort of thing. So the next logical step was to become a librarian. So I got my master's in information science with a focus on school librarians. But all that time, I'm creating this website that I'm talking to developers, uncovering things. YouTube became a thing in this time period. So I'm able to share things like Star Wars Battlefront 3. The Halo Mega Bloks game was one of the last ones I did before joining the museum. All of those things just through building relationships with people, because that's what it's about. It's about the people.
For sure.
So I'm taking classes too that would benefit. Hey, what happens if a game preservation job shows up someday? What is it that they're going to want? And I got lucky. I guessed right that they want that kind of experience doing something, but also the professional experience, being able to catalog things, handling information properly. All those things came together. So when the Strong was hiring, it'll be 5 years this year.
Nice.
It was like this perfect thing. And we always tell, my wife and I tell this story. We told her dad, like right as I was starting to apply, he was like, well, I guess you guys are moving to Rochester. So that day, and it would be months before I found out if I got the job. So that day, was a day that changed everything.
That's awesome.
But then that brings us to the museum.
Right. And, for those who are not familiar with the Strong Museum of Play, can you explain to us what it is and kind of the history on how it came to be?
Sure. So the Strong is first of all, it's a giant museum if you've never seen it before. It's 285,000 square feet. It's a museum that's devoted to the study and the exploration of play. So we're not a solely video game museum, but we're looking at the ways that play in general encourages learning, creativity, how it impacts culture at a broader sense. But that's built on this collection. So we have over 560 or 570,000 objects at this point.
Wow.
And that does not include library and archives, which are incredible in their own right. But among that are, the tiniest doll shoes, doll houses, action figure accessories, board games, role-playing games, and of course, video games, being a major form of play, make up a huge part of that. So that collection is somewhere around 65,000 video game-related objects. And again, that includes the games and the hardware, but also includes things like World of Warcraft branded mice, action figures that are video games, and all sorts of like really strange promo materials that get put out by the developers. But that's a giant collection, and the library itself has hundreds of thousands of volumes, trade catalogs, books, magazines, you name it. And then the archives holds source code if you're interested in video games, journals, documentation, prototype builds if we're talking about games. All this stuff that really comes together to paint this big picture of what gaming and what play is. But the museum wasn't actually started as a play museum. It was founded by Margaret Woodbury Strong, who was born in 1897. She was a part of this wealthy family here in our area. They were collectors. They traveled the world. She was quite playful when you look back. She liked to bowl. She played golf at a really high level for the time. But along those travels, she was collecting things like furniture, like dishes, but also playful things. Among those were over 27,000 dolls and doll houses.
Yep.
And that was by the 1960s. So at the time, she was really starting to look at, okay, I've got all this stuff. What can I do with it? So she had started to add displays to her essentially mansion of a house and started to invite people to come see her collection. But in 1968, she chartered the Margaret Woodbury Strong Museum of Fascination. So that would be the beginning process. But then she would pass away just shortly after at the age of 72. Right. But she left most of her collection and financial resources to really get the museum off the ground. Among that, she was the largest single shareholder in Kodak at a time where that actually meant something, a bit different than today. Right. So the museum itself opened where we are today in 1982. And it was built largely on her original collection. We've since expanded. As we started to bring in new exhibits like our Sesame Street exhibit, we started to realize we had something really special that was different than what was originally envisioned. And then we adopted this mission of preserving play. And the rest is history.
I remember as a kid going to the Strong Museum, and at the time when I was a child, it was still kind of a lot of it was focused around dolls and furniture and that kind of stuff. But it was always interesting to kind of go in there and just see some of the collection. And then as time had progressed, seeing it contain things that were a lot more, we'll say, closer to what I was interested in checking out was awesome.
Right. And I know people have this idea of what a doll house looks like. It's this plastic thing that came in a box. No, the doll houses that she collected, I always say, were nicer than the apartment that I lived in up until recently. Some of them had these tiny little plugs that you could plug in for electricity that would run through the whole thing. You plug in the lights. Seriously? Like really intricate, amazing craftsmanship on some of these. They're gigantic, some of them too. Really just incredible things. So I want people to not have this vision of today's doll houses, which are not what she was collecting.
For sure. And, one of the things that I love, too, is that, nowadays it's an opportunity for me as an adult to bring my nieces and nephews to the Strong Museum of Play and provide them with some context to the things that, I enjoyed as a kid. And to them, it's this amazing experience because they see that, myself and my brother are pretty excited to go in there and play Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, those kinds of things, but also kind of point out some of the video game ephemera that you have throughout the entire museum, as well as other things like like Rubik's Cubes and all those kinds of things that they would be not exactly familiar with, but are now becoming exposed to. And it's just a great chance for them to experience something new and me to experience nostalgia. So it's a win-win.
It's for children of all ages is what we say.
Exactly.
So, Andrew, the Museum of Play is home to the World Video Game Hall of Fame. What is the process you all go through to decide what games belong in the Hall of Fame?
Sure. So the Hall of Fame was founded a few years before I got here, so I don't know the exact history of the true beginnings of it. But what I find really interesting about the World Video Game Hall of Fame is we're not necessarily looking at the best games ever made. That's a whole different debate. It's kind of harder to try to capture.
That would be a nightmare, yeah.
Exactly. But instead, we have 4 criteria that we're really looking at. The first is its icon status. Is it widely recognized and remembered? Something like Pac-Man, Super Mario Brothers. that they truly are icons that kind of transcend just video games alone.
Right.
The next we look at is longevity. Is it more than just a passing fad? Has it enjoyed popularity over time? This is important because we're always having these discussions about how long is the right amount of time. But also, not every game is going to remain as popular over such a broad period of time. What if Pac-Man had just come and gone, but it still has these other categories that could lead it to be selected? So the next would be geographical reach. We do call it the World Video Game Hall of Fame for a reason. Right. We don't want games that are just popular in the US or just popular in Japan or wherever that may be. And the last is kind of the one that can kind of trump all of them, and that's the influence. Has it influenced other games and the development of other titles for years to come? Does it influence other forms of entertainment? Does it have an impact on popular culture that is, again, beyond that kind of video game world? All of those things are considered when we're talking about games that are going to potentially be nominated. So those nominations come from or they're built on a number of different kind of areas where we're pulling information from. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's obvious. A Super Mario Brothers,
right?
Yes, like you need to have that in there. And I will say, there's always a chance that there's a few of these still that haven't been selected. The first class was 2015, so it's still relatively young. So if your favorite game's not in there, give it some time. So that does have, part of it. Part of it is we do have a nomination process that goes on basically year round of, do you think a game is going to be, you want a game to be recognized? Let us know. We do track your IP addresses in the sense that, we can realize if they're all coming from the same place. So maybe get a few of your friends to get in on that. But then we're also looking at what sort of articles are being written online. Are there books being written about it? Are there developers talking about it? What are our selection committee who ultimately decides who is going to select the inductees for the year? What are they saying about the games? Are they saying, oh, we should have considered this other game? And just conversations that we have in general. So we come up with a nominee pool of about 12 games. So we're just a few weeks away. The first week of May is when we'll reveal what will be inducted in 2022. But to give some context to the listeners, this year's games are Civilization, which was first nominated in 2016. Mm-hmm. Resident Evil, first nominated in 2017. 2018, we had Dance Dance Revolution and Miss Pac-Man. Another one that's always a bit controversial is a holdover from 2019, which is Candy Crush.
Ooh.
NBA Jam. But new for this year are Assassin's Creed, which again, is that long enough? But Minecraft is in, so it could be. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, one of the best games ever. Who knows? Mm-hmm. Microsoft Minesweeper. I think people forget about games like that.
I love Minesweeper. Yes, Minesweeper finally getting its time in the spotlight as is deserved.
Parappa the Rapper, one of my favorite games of all times. Rogue, which, you see the roguelikes being so popular. How could you not at least nominate Rogue? And the last is the casual game Words with Friends. All really interesting things. But again, they're not all going to be people's favorites. So I find that to be really interesting. So we do have an international selection advisory committee. I think I got the words in the right order. That essentially they vote. They vote for the ones that they give us some sort of comments that list why they're choosing this game over another game, which again, we consider in the future. But there's also the player's choice ballot, which is closed for the year. But that's where, fans around the world can go on and cast their own ballot. And that is weighted as the equivalent to one of the people on the committee. So all of that comes together. We could select 3 games this year, 4 games. Hey, we could do 6 games this year. Mm-hmm. But it creates a really interesting list of games that aren't always what you expect, but are still really significant.
Love it. And as far as player's choice in future years, they're able to go onto your website to do that, correct?
Yep, they can go to the World Video Game Hall of Fame.org website and vote there. You can always follow on the museumofplay.org website just for all the news that's going on. That's always useful. But yeah, it's a simple vote. And in the meantime, I'm sure after we close this year, you'll be able to start nominating more games. So if you want Battletoads to get in, go for it.
I don't know if I would want Battletoads.
I always try to think of games that are really the opposite of, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, best game ever. Does a game like E.T. deserve to be in?
Which is interesting you brought that up, because we had actually just interviewed Howard Scott Warshaw, who programmed E.T. So
exactly. I don't think it's the worst game ever, but it's certainly important. Does it meet the geographical reach? I don't know. Influence. It's an interesting conversation that I would say that the listeners should let us know what they think.
Definitely. That's great. So kind of moving on to some of the things that are going on in the kind of the background of the Museum of Play. I know that, watching John Rigg's YouTube video, had a chance to see the back room itself with the plethora of gaming stuff, So how does the museum go about acquiring those pieces for the collection?
Sure. So it's worth noting, I think John's video covered one of our 2 storage spaces. I can't remember if he got into both, but there'll also be a third storage space because that's how much stuff that we have going on. So the way things come into the museum is there is an acquisitions process. We do have a budget every year to buy a certain amount of things, World Video Game Hall of Fame. If we need something to display, it's a lot easier just to go to eBay or go to a local vendor and say, hey, do you have this game? Can we just buy it? No reason to go beyond that. But honestly, most of our best items in the collection, especially the archival material, things that highlight how games were made, they're often donated by the people that made them. Sometimes they're donated by collectors. I've donated stuff to the museum as well. And it's really about building those relationships, because like I said, we do have a budget, but it only goes so far, especially when you're trying to get things that are a bit newer. So, we processed, I should look it up real quick. I can tell you exactly how many games we've done this year, or at least objects. So I think we're at like 3,000 objects for the year already, which compared to a lot of museums who buy less things, but perhaps more expensive things, there's a lot of processing that goes on. So when we get things, whether they're donated or purchased, they all come in, they get cataloged, they get numbered, which is totally removable, reversible, so it doesn't harm the object. But it allows us to say, again, this was the 3,126th object that was cataloged in this year. But it also gets logged of what shelf it goes on, so we always know where every one of those 500 plus thousand objects are in the museum. They get photographed, so hopefully they show up in our online portal, but that only has about a fifth or so of our total collection on there. So it really is a group effort. I'm just one of the curators. We actually have 2 curators, including myself, working on video games. We have others working on board games, toys, and that sort of thing. And also, we just announced a few months ago, or last year, our game show archive, the National Game Show Archive, which is really exciting to see objects start rolling in lately.
Interesting. I bet you got some weird stuff in there.
Yeah, it's pretty new, but I'm pretty sure I saw one of the Plinko chips from The Price is Right. So if that's what we're collecting, it's going to be an amazing collection.
That's awesome.
So out of the thousands and thousands of items in the museum, what would you say is your favorite piece in the collection?
I always love this question because I have like a standard answer, but it results in something different every time. So the one that I always point to that's not a video game object is we have a prototype of Monopoly.
Oh, wow.
It's all hand-drawn, made by Charles Darrow, who made the game, or, was influenced by other games of the time.
Indeed, there's a story.
There's a whole story there, but I won't get into it because I'm not the expert. But it's round because it's thought that his kitchen table was round. It has some typos on it because they're all basically handwritten, some of which have since have been in the actual Monopoly game for decades as well, as little pieces, but like the houses and hotels look like they're carved from like the baseboard around his house. So really cool. You can't see it anywhere else. Such a historic game, whether you love Monopoly or not, you know what Monopoly is. So on that front, that is just one of those iconic objects that it's very, very hard to ignore. But in terms of video game stuff, for me, it's always what's coming recently or what I'm expecting to arrive.
Sure.
Just the other week, we got a package from somebody who worked at Sega of America for many years. And in that were 2 tapes of commercials that she worked on. One was one of the first commercials made to advertise directly to girls that they wanted to play the Sega Genesis. which is really, really important in the scheme of things. The other was a tape of footage shown for Sonic Extreme, which is a canceled Sega Saturn Sonic game. So to have one of the original tapes of the highest quality of that footage is really cool.
Wow.
But also included was a partial treatment for a Sonic the Hedgehog movie from back in 1995, which also was never made. So you can actually find scans of that online that the donator put online somewhat recently. But, talking about big history, iconic games, a game that's in the World Video Game Hall of Fame, doesn't get much bigger than Sonic.
For sure. So, when it's taking a look at the museum itself as well, can you tell us about the philanthropy that the museum is involved with?
Sure. There are a ton of programs that we're always working on to reach out to new groups of people, whether that's local community or a bit further out. Just to give an idea of attendance, we had almost 600,000 people before COVID, and we're in the middle of an expansion, which will add 90,000 square feet to the museum, but also hope to add 400,000 people every year. So we're really looking at who are those people? Who are the people that we can best work with, best reach? And who are those people who may otherwise struggle to come visit a museum? Visiting the museum isn't the cheapest thing in the world nowadays. So we offer $3 admission to recipients in the SNAP program, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, for them and their family. And this allows people to come to the museum that otherwise wouldn't. We work with different foundations, including one that we announced, I think, last year, which is the WeGo Foundation. And essentially, we work with them to provide children in hospitals across the U.S. a fully controllable robot that they can control throughout the museum.
Nice.
So every once in a while, I'll see it's basically a tablet on a Segway rolling down the hallway. You just can't help but smile because, these are kids who are in hospitals dealing with some major issues, but you can have the opportunity to have them smile as something that's really, really important to us. We also have a big deaf and hard of hearing community here in Rochester.
Yep.
So we're always reaching out for partnerships with that. Just a few weeks ago in March, we partnered with RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology's National Technical Institute for the Deaf, and we had a Deaf Day of Play here at the museum. In addition, we have other programs like our Sensory Sundays, where we turn down the volume, have a much limited audience in the mornings on certain Sundays of the month, to allow people who could otherwise be overwhelmed in the museum environment, especially on days like break weeks, like is going on now at the museum, where we can have 3, 4, sometimes 5,000 guests in the museum in a day. This allows us to slow down and let everybody enjoy. So we're always doing things like that. We're working with schools to provide programming, and we're looking for more ways to continue to do that because we embrace the fact that our community loves us and we love our community. So we want to give back to them as much as they give us.
That's so cool. So kind of rounding back to video games, in the gaming world, there's this ongoing debate as to whether or not video games are art. What are your feelings on this topic?
This is another one that I think back to my college days where I finally had one professor who understood what video games were. And this was when the debate around Shadow of the Colossus was happening. Is that game art? And to me, of course it's art. No matter how you look at it, yes, art is in the eye of the beholder, all of that. It doesn't matter whether you think it's good art or bad art. It's art. And even if you don't think video games as a medium as a whole is considered art, there are clearly elements within that are art, whether it's, 3D models, the pixel art, the music that goes into them. I think the way that people program is art in this weird way. I just don't see how it could not be art to me. If the elements are art, if the end result is art, is performance art in some weird way, the things that people do with games, I think streaming, that's an art in and of itself. It's really an artful format that is very unique, that I don't know that the classical art world has fully embraced it yet.
Right.
But I think, anytime we get somebody in, because again, we're not a video game museum, so we get people of really a large variety of backgrounds coming to the museum, both as guests, but also as researchers behind the scenes. I think as you start to go into it and look at it that little bit deeper, even those that aren't interested in video games, I think they can see that it's art.
Nice.
And, one of the things I like about the Museum of Play in particular is that as a result of it being a play museum, you're able to interact a lot of times with some of that art as you go through. Which is
Absolutely.
a wholly, different experience than your typical art gallery you would go to, where you're like, oh, that's a nice painting. That's a nice painting. But
that's one of the key features of what we do. Like,
right.
Yes, we're a collections-based museum. We have all these things that I've told you about already.
Right.
But on top of the interpretation that you'd see at one of those art museums where they're telling you about the painting that you're looking at or the sculpture, interactivity is such a big part of that, not just in the video games, but of everything. I couldn't imagine going to a museum about play and not having the ability to play myself.
That's a great point.
It would be silly.
So, Andrew, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to join us, to talk to us a little bit about your experience with working with the Museum of Play and kind of the uniqueness of the museum itself. And by the way, again, I will say you have the coolest job I've ever heard of. So
I agree. I get to talk to so many cool people, whether you're a guest coming here. I did quickly mention research. If you're really interested in something, make an appointment, come do research. If it's not out on the floor for just guests, we'll still generally let you see it. And there's not like a charge to that or anything. You just have to get to Rochester. If one of those 1,000 of items on the floor isn't doing it for you, I guarantee you something behind the scenes will.
Ooh.
It sounds like something I might be spending a lot of time in the back room.
Yeah, feel free. Let me know. If there's something you want to look at. We host everything from, people writing books, documentary crews, the kind of people you'd expect, but also YouTubers. You mentioned John Riggs earlier. He was one of many who has been here at the museum, doing things like that, but also super fans. We had a fan of Skylanders come in a few years ago. It was, I think it was a father-son combination. We were just really interested in it and learning about how the game was made. And of course, please come use our stuff.
That's great. So kind of to wrap things up here, though, lastly, where can people connect with you and the Strong Museum of Play?
Sure. I mean, the easiest way to follow the museum is either on their website, museumofplay.org, any of the kind of other websites. You can go to our archives website if that's what you're into. On Twitter or Facebook. I think Twitter usually has a different audience than Facebook, but again, you can find us on there. If you want to follow me, Twitter is also probably the best. I post all sorts of cool stuff as it comes into the museum, as I discover new things myself. So twitter.com/Borman18. That's probably the best place because there's all sorts of cool stuff. And then if you want to see other stuff, we have a YouTube channel, but also just the people writing books. If it's a book about, video games or play, we're probably cited in there. So it's always worth a read.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This was great. And we really appreciate you filling us in and all the cool stuff that you're working with and that you're involved with.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day.
No problem. Anytime.
Hey, Donnie.
Oh my God.
Did you get the free copy of Little Samson?
No. It's never a good sign when you get to the house, somebody opens a door, a guy opens a door in a robe, and you hear Goodbye Horses playing in the background. Oh my God.
Are you saying it was a trap?
Were the moths the giveaway?
Yeah. Did you get the hose again? Or
he had like an industrial sized bottle of lotion. And when I saw that, I think that's what made it click.
You open the door and he's like, "What size are you?"
You about size 13? What? No, I've lost weight.
Well, Donnie, we are so glad to have you back in one piece.
Yeah. With your skin on and everything.
That could have been the end of Donnie G Retro. Little Samson, I will have you one day. Just not tonight.
You will be mine. Oh, yes. You will be mine.
Swing.
All right. So thank you for listening to episode 18 of Gamers Week podcast. And a big thank you to Retro Game Club Podcast, the Elitist Podcast, and Love Retro BTW for sponsoring this episode. Don't forget to check out their links in the show notes. And if you want to connect with Gamers Week, you can follow us on Twitter at GamersWeekPC. Email us at gamersweekpodcast@gmail.com. Visit our merch store at gamers-week-podcast.creator-spring.com. Or if you want to do it the easy way, follow the link in the show notes. And of course, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/gamersweek. Finally, since you made it all the way to the end of the episode, please leave us a rating and a review to let us know how we did. We really value your feedback. And while you're there, consider subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Hey, Yoda, will I find a complete in-box copy of Stack Up at the Midwest Gaming Classic?
Not if anything to say about it. I have.
He called dibs.
Yeah, apparently that's what it sounded like.
Ah, yes.
Not if anything to say about it.